Hey, I am Jake from the Fireside Tattoo Network, and welcome back to Tattoo Overview. In previous episodes of Tattoo Overview, we discussed the components that make up tattoo ink, as well as the potential regulation of those components by the FDA. So let's take a step back and look at some other industries that are using a lot of the same colorants that we are in tattooing. So one example would be in the food industry. Beef stamping, and also if you've paid attention to your eggs, the little blue or red stamps that are on your eggs are actually the exact same colorants that we use in tattoo inks. The same colorants are also used in the medical industry for biopsies, or tattooing actual registration marks on skin for nuclear medicine. Even the automotive industry, the same pigments are used in automotive paint that are used in tattooing. So besides using the same colorants, what do all these industries have in common? Well, they're all regulated. So does that mean that tattoo ink is safe? So the answer is that no one really knows, and that's why the FDA is pushing regulation on the tattoo industry right now. Since our last episode, the EU has begun regulating ink in Europe, and the FDA has decided to follow suit. Let's take a look at how these other industries have tackled the issue of safety and regulation. So the food industry is actually regulated by the
USDA,
which is paid for by Big Food. And the medical industry is regulated by the FDA, which is paid for by Big Pharma. You see where I'm going with this? Finally, the automotive industry is regulated by the NTSB, which is paid for by Big Auto. Was that what I say? All of these government agencies have one thing in common, and that's that they are funded by the industries that they are regulating. So in a way, these industries are all sort of self-regulating since they're footing the bill for the government agency that's watching over them. My point with bringing all this up is that maybe the tattoo industry can follow that lead through the form of a guild or some sort of self-regulating body. So what would it take for the tattoo industry to self-regulate? What's involved in the process? Well, the process would basically involve all ink manufacturers batching or sending samples of their ink to an independent third-party lab that had a specific protocol. That protocol would be completely transparent and would answer all the questions that the FDA wants to know regarding safety. So it really comes down to where we as tattooers put our hard-earned dollars. If we agree to only buy ink from manufacturers who have met this protocol and have received a stamp of approval, then we've gotten in front of the problem. So what would a self-regulating protocol look like for the tattoo industry that would satisfy the FDA? Well, I can't answer that question, but I know someone who can. I'm going to welcome back our secret S8 chemist.
The first thing that you would need is full disclosure of all of the colorants. So if the ink manufacturer didn't know the actual molecule that it was, they would need to give it a bare minimum, a thing called a CI number. It's a color index number. With the color index number, you can infer the chemical classes that it comes from. All chemicals are sort of grouped into functional groups. It's like a table of contents in a book, and under that table of contents you'll have a bunch of chapters. So the chemical index is the book. But for a large group of chemicals, you can eliminate whether or not they're safe or not by the chapters that they're in. And so the first thing that you would need on the list is a disclosure of all the chemical components that make up the pigment, or what the chemical components are made of. And that doesn't really step on anybody's intellectual property because chemicals are chemicals. The ink manufacturer doesn't actually make that chemical component, they just purchase it from a third party. So it's almost like you have a big list of possible things that produce a color, and it's up to you as the ink manufacturer to select the appropriate one. So there's nothing that's really given away in terms of intellectual property. And they don't have to give away how they formulated it. So in other words, if I've got a red and I've got a blue and I'm going to make a purple shade, I need to tell you what the red is and what the blue is, but I don't have to tell you how many parts red and blue that I mixed up to get to that particular color. And the information about these chemicals that are in the public domain will tell you all of the things that the FDA wants to know. So the light fastness, what chemical group it came from. So if sunlight hits it, will it turn into something inside of the body that's dangerous? Those are the kind of things that they're looking for. The way that it can be, that's typically it's done in a protocol, is you give what that ingredient is. You don't have to tell anybody the ratios, but the laboratory will know what the ratios are, and they keep that private. So if there's any intellectual property, it's all contained in the third-party testing facility. That's what protocols do. They make sure that everybody's protected, but enough information is given so that other people that are dependent on that information can make safe decisions. And that's really what the FDA is looking for. The last thing that they don't want to do, which they're being forced to do, is grab up all the tattoo inks that anybody makes, fraction all those things out, try to determine what chemical they are, and then decide which ones are safe or not. If you just disclose what it is, it saves them a ton of work. That's why self-regulation works. You're taking the work burden off of the FDA and saying, this is what's in it, this is what we're using. And what the independent third party does is they guarantee that what you said was in the ink on your formulation actually pops up in the batch so that no one sort of cheats the system.
How expensive is this and who would pay for it?
If you take the overhead of taking a sample, 25 milliliters, and then putting it in the mail and sending it to the testing facility, that really kind of doesn't add that much to the fraction of a penny over a batch lot. So it's relatively inexpensive.
What about the proprietary components, like the surfactants, the wetting agents?
So they would have to disclose that to the lab, but the lab can mask some of that stuff, so they can say passed or not passed. So it could be the case that someone's using a wetting agent that's used for wall coverings, for instance, and you're not supposed to use it with a human being, and then it would say fail, but no one's required to disclose that information. The trick is the protocol, a well-defined protocol that answers all the questions that you preemptively present to the regulators so they don't have to do all of that discovery work. That's really what they're looking for. And in some ways, not that they wouldn't want to pay for it, it's all the other systems that they would have to put into place to be able to pay for it add an enormous amount of expense and time. So self-regulation's really the way to go.
There's been some talk in the tattoo community about some common ingredients in, I think, blue inks being cut out by the FDA. Do you know anything about that?
So there was a press release that was issued on the EU's position on blue colorants and green colorants. And ultimately what they decided is they don't really have an answer yet, but they're going to put a 2-year window on the regulation process so people can find alternatives to specific blue pigments and specific green pigments. So there are some things that they're going to regulate, but they've decided that they're not going to cut out all blues and all greens, because that's the path that they were going down for a long time. But they're going to give you a 2-year window to transition. So that's the perfect time to step in and say, here's the class of chemicals that we can use that are approved. Here's what colors they produce, what wavelengths of colors they produce, and then put the creative burden on the ink manufacturing company to come up with appropriate coloring solutions, how to formulate those colors, because you're not really limited, you just have to do more creative work. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that gets lost in this discussion is the companies have to come up with creative ways to make interesting products. That's not the tattooer's job, and they get to decide what to buy or not, but the company needs to do the creative work.
I want to thank our secret S8 chemist for sharing his big brain with us. That just goes to show that we as an industry need to invite smart people from other industries to form creative partnerships and solve a lot of these problems. That is it for this episode. I hope that you got something out of that. Thank you so much for supporting what we do. Hey, I'd like to give a special shout out to our great friends at S8 Tattoo. Click the link in the description below to check out all of their fantastic tattoo products, and be sure to use the code Fireside at checkout to get 10% off. While you're surfing the wild, wild webs, you might as well swing over to firesidetattoo.com and check out all of our online courses and workshops. Maybe pick up a t-shirt from our sweet merch store. Finally, I would like to invite you to subscribe to our channel so that you can stay up to date with all of the goings on and be notified when new videos drop each week. Thank you so much for supporting what we do, and we'll catch you next time.